it's a resource, even though there is one SDG goal that is specifically for water, but really water runs across all the SDGs, right? And if we can't deal with the water crisis, it will be very difficult for us to address any of these SDGs when we think about it. But we know that it is under stress, too little, too much, too polluted. And when we think about the poly crisis that we're experiencing today, whether this is around economics, rising cost of living, geopolitical stability, food and water stresses, we know that a lot of this is actually underpinning this is actually the fact that we are also dealing with very disrupted hydrological cycles that is interrupting supply chains. And the good news, even though it's a poly crisis, is that water is an impact multiplier. So if we can actually better deal with water as a solution and as an opportunity, right, and use it as a way for us to collectively work together, we might be able to be in a better position to confront what is ahead. I wanted to draw your attention before I invite the three fine men on stage with me today to speak, to draw your attention to three words in the title: unlocking innovation and financing ecosystem for water security. The first word I want you to pay attention to is innovation. Why innovation? We are dealing with the poly crisis. Transformational change and thinking is needed, and we need this innovation across policy. We need innovation in how we think about business and solutions. We need innovation in how we think about governance, right? And we also need innovation in how we think about working better and more closely with one another. Financing, right, has been spoken a lot, the need for finance to support transitions, nature positive transitions. And more importantly is we need to be smarter in how we think about the economics of water and valuing what water is as a resource and being so critical to our various activities. And finally, ecosystem, really multi-stakeholder partnerships. I don't think anyone will disagree with me. The need for partnerships is more critical than before. Public-private partnerships, global, regional, local levels. How do we actually engage communities? But more importantly, how do we even think about partnerships across generations? And on that note, I have with me here three persons who also represent institutions that have been very critical in the setup of the Water Resources Group. And this was a group that was set up 14 years ago, right? It was set up primarily to really look at fostering public-private partnership in the water space and to look at how global conversations can also help catalyze and foster support country partnerships. And today, the Water Resources Group has got a significant presence in at least 14 geographies, working with governments at the local levels to support projects. And Jürgen comes from the World Bank. He's Vice President for Sustainable Development. We have Paul Bouquet, who is Chairman of Nestlé. Both of them co-chair the WRG Governing Council. And then we have Muhammad Mulet, right, who is from the IFC. And IFC was also very instrumental in birthing and catalyzing the Water Resources Group. So maybe on this note, I do want to invite Jürgen to kick off the meeting today and share with us the journey that WRG has gone on over the last 14 years. What has worked? What has been challenging? And given the water crisis that we know we are confronted with today, how can we turbocharge the Water Resources Group? And then I'll invite Paul to also share his reflections from the private sector and also Muhammad to represent the IFC perspective. So Jürgen, please.
Great, thank you, Jim, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. It's a busy week and it's Friday, so that you still have enthusiasm for the topic is really, really welcome because the world needs it. I think it's very clear. We live in multiple crises, like you said. We're not solving any of them unless we change the way we manage our water resources around the world. This is fundamental for climate change. It's fundamental for the health issues, the pandemic impacts that we're having. It's fundamental for food security, which is with us everywhere in a growing way. It's also fundamental for the migration and fragility crisis that we see in many parts of the world. So clearly, we don't change the way we manage and handle our water resources, we're not going to get traction in any of these. And I think this is a recognition that I now feel having interactions country by country. What was sort of among the top maybe 15 priorities is now in the top 5 priorities. With ministers of finance, not only with ministers of irrigation or ministers of water resources, it's moving up the ladder of priority, even with multiple competing issues at the same time. And I think there is a reason for that. And I think Paul and others who kicked this off, started this water resource group 14 years ago, already had a vision at that time that unless we find ways to work together in a different way, where we help each other, where we support each other, where we link the policy innovation, the policy discussion with the investment in the public sector, with the investment in the private sector in a more meaningful and a more coherent way, we're not going to get traction. So I think after 14 years, where we're concluding is right now, today, if we didn't have the Water Resource Group 2030, we would invent it now. We probably call it Water Resource Group 2035, because we're only 7 years away from our goal. But the fact that it still exists and that it keeps growing and that major corporations around the world continue to be a member and are investing in it, both financially, but also with their CEOs all the way up to the top, that shows that there is value in this. And I think today's, we just had a council meeting, a governance council meeting, where this was clearly reaffirmed that we need to now scale this up and we need to scale this out. Not just to have more platforms in more countries, but to have real impact on the ground. So one thing we did this morning is to harvest some of these success stories, listening to countries like South Africa, like from India, from Mexico, what works on the ground? When does it actually really do something different that otherwise wouldn't happen? And so we're going to be much more deliberate, much more systematic about that, and then go on to a sort of, more engagement mode with other companies, and Paul, maybe you can talk about that as well, but also other governments and other actors and players in this space. Because at the end of the day, the action happens locally. This is not like climate change in a way, right? When you pollute in one country, the other country suffers. Water resources, it's a global issue in aggregate, but it's local where the action is needed, and the impacts are local. If you do it right in your country, unless it's, of course, if it's, river basins that cut across countries, you have an impact downstream. But fundamentally, the solutions have to be done locally. And one thing from the World Bank that I've learned over the years, there's nothing better than a success story. When you can show others something that works in a country, and then automatically you get the question, well, if they can do it, why can't we do it? What's between us? You also mentioned water pricing, and I want to just mention this because this has been the perennial issue where there is a huge amount of cynicism in the global community, like, oh, we're never going to get poor people to pay for water, what have you. I just don't believe that. We have increasingly now evidence, if it's done right, you can actually put a value on water, and you can have a system in place that allows you to move forward without constant subsidies and all these things, right? It's just, we have to find the right narrative, the right examples, and the right way of doing it. And I see these examples now increasingly, and I think without that, we cannot unlock future investments to a significant scale. And that is not to say, every poor farmer or every poor household needs to pay for water, but it needs to be done in a way where there are water allocations for individuals. Some of them can be free, but they cannot exceed them, right? There has to be a better management of the system as a whole. And I think we are getting more and more examples now as a result of these country platforms where we can show that this can be done.
Thank you, Jürgen. If I could invite Paul to share your thoughts.
No, it's a fantastic introduction on the topic. And actually, I'm puzzled. If we say water is life, we don't care for it. We say no water, no life, don't care for it. We say it's a human right, don't care for it. We say it's on the base of social and industrial economical development. We don't care for it. We say it's very important. We don't give value, because it's a very different asking a price for a liter of water or valuing it. So it's the value equation that matters, and indeed you have to see the affordability by the individuals. Then what's another story? But if you see the importance of water, everybody somewhere, water is life, very important. We don't care for it. Actually, water is also so intimately linked with the environmental challenges. global warming. Water is intimately linked, and we speak so much about the other, but don't link water with it. And it's so good to see that we have here been in the context of the United Nations talking for the first time in many, many years about water. And that in a setting that is multi-stakeholder, which is at the base of the Water Resource Group. Another challenging thing that's puzzling, the water problem is a global problem with local expressions. But it is global as per se. And more of these equations are coming through that the drop of water is local, but it is so linked in ecosystems and natural systems that is global. And yet, water can be solved. And that's the nice thing about it. Water has solutions that you feel and see straight away. And that's what the Water Resource Groups does. This recognition, this getting up on the higher priority agenda of governments and civil society and companies as such is a good feeling. So, but the solutions, they do require fact-based, evidence-based, data-based, consistent, collaborative action, and should be taken more out of the emotional, inconsistent approaches to it. Water is so important to life that it creates always emotions. And that's good. And the emotion should be the driver of doing something about it. But then doing something about it should be based on fact-based, evidence-based, tangible, rational dimensions. And that is what the resource group is doing. And that's why it is working, because it goes into the fields, it goes into the regions where the water stress is, it goes about the specifics of the region, and it is multi-stakeholder. There's one specific condition though. It is the ownership of the action, the ownership of the project of whatsoever in situ should be in the hands of government or local authorities, because that's where it should. They should do the framing, and then the multi-stakeholder dimension should do the painting, and it's multi-dimensional. It is linked with private sector, it is linked with financing, it is linked with government financing too. It is linked also with the people involved. Agriculture is extremely important in this. As you know, water and agriculture is a huge, very deep relationship, and that's where the stress is too, but the solution is there too. So we have to bring the farmers and the small farmers also with us, and that is actually what the Water Resource Group does. It is in situ together with the realities in front where the challenge is. So I want to stop here, but water is life, so it's time to care for it.
Indeed. On this point, I also want to invite Mr. Goulet, Vice President of Industries at the IFC. You've been investing into water for many years now. You've also been a catalytic force for the Water Resources Group. Can you tell us a little bit how we can think better about how to unlock finance and innovative solutions to support and to address the water crisis?
Indeed, and thank you very much. I would say that we have been investing in water for a very long time, but I would not say that the type of financing we have been doing has remained the same. The sector has evolved, the challenges have become multiple, and how you do it now is completely different than how you did 20, 25 years ago. And so that landscape has shifted significantly. As my co-panelists have indicated, what you see now is a sector that cuts across climate, that cuts across food security, that cuts across health, that cuts across migration. I mean, you name it, you have a piece of it in water. So what does that mean when it comes to financing it? First of all, the way that complexity was framed tells you that you need innovation. And the more complex a problem is, the more the quantity of and the quality of innovation that you have to bring into. So again, innovation is not just the technology part, but it's also the financing part. I think the second element that's very important here is how do you close this gap that has been widening, which is the resources that are required, the financing that's required for this sector and what's available. And that gap has been growing. And, you know, it's sad sometimes to think, but people for the longest time have taken water for granted. It's going to be there. It's going to be in abundance. And, you know, let's worry about other things, right? It's not the case anymore. So what we have been doing is we've been working on upstream at the policy side with, within the World Bank Group, making sure that governments understand the urgency and the importance that's attached to this. We have been thinking about innovating financial instruments that make projects more bankable and therefore more palatable to private sector investors. And this is important because 90% today of the sector is in the hands of the public sector or governments. The resources that are required cannot and will never be satisfied by the public sector. You need to have a private sector solution. So when it comes to our interventions, it's always looking at for the technology, supporting the technology. So for example, we support technology not just from the more straight line water, but also supporting agricultural and agri-tech to bring in into that angle. From recycling water, it's very important. And making this bankable. Now, you are going to have markets and countries where this is going to require concessional finance to bring in that, private sector and bankability, and we are pushing to raise those kind of resources. But overall, priority for us, a problem that has to be solved sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you. I know time is running out, but I do want to squeeze in one quick question because the topic here is around innovation, financing, unlocking, and scaling our efforts around water. There are 3,000 people gathered at the UN Water Conference. It's the first conference for the last since the last 44 years, right? Which is promising, which means that people, we get it, right? The how, the why, the what, but the how is something that we need to figure out, right? And I think one of the big takeaways I'm hearing is that there is a need for systems change. There's a need for partnerships. So maybe I'll do a quick fire, right? Quick round, right? Can you tell us, right, what is the magic sauce for partnerships to work? Because partnership is one thing, but partnerships that are effective, that can really drive systems change and innovation. What would you leave with the audience here?
I'll kick it off. So partnerships we have established, right? This is all hands on deck type of thing, and it needs to work top down and bottom up. You need to have a policy framework that is conducive to do things jointly, and you need to have real things that you discuss. And if you stay at one level, it's not going anywhere, it doesn't scale. But what, you know, I should be answering your question, but what I really want to add in terms of innovation is it's not just technical innovation, like you said, it's financial innovation. And I'll have two thoughts on that. And one you may not expect. We know that agriculture is the biggest user of water worldwide, 60 to 80%. We know that broadly it's using the water extremely inefficiently, with some exceptions. What we also know is that agriculture is subsidized worldwide to the tune of about $670 billion per year. You ask for sources of money. Maybe that's not where you would look intuitively, but we are looking at that. This is $750 billion every year that is given by governments to farmers to support what they do. Very little of that money is actually helping with what we are discussing here, with saving water, conserving water, doing the right things with water management. That can be done differently. Very little of that money is actually helping with climate change. It actually often subsidizes fertilizer unnecessarily where there is already too much, et cetera, et cetera. So rethinking the way governments spend their own money by supporting farmers is a very important one. And I do not say cut subsidies to farmers. Farmers are facing huge challenges. They need to be supported. It's not the point. 600 billion may actually be quite about the right number that farmers need for support, but they need to be supported in a different way. They need to get support to save water. They need to get support to manage water better, to have lower footprint, to have more diversity in their crops. And there are fortunately some countries that are moving in that direction, and we're seeing some progress. But I want to leave this, you asked me what you should take away from this session. This is one I hope you can have part of your conversations. Because when countries say there is no money in the kitty, you know, we have no fiscal space, well, not quite, right? If you have hundreds of billions of dollars to give, make sure that you give them in a way that actually gets your return. And the second one, very briefly, is of course the whole question around bonds, right? There is a sustainability bonds, green bonds, blue bonds, and we will get to into the water bond issue as well. There's a growing number of individuals and companies in the investor community that wants to do exactly what we are trying to achieve. It wants to support a journey that makes water use more sustainable, and it's willing to do that. But the devil is in the detail, right? To get these individual bonds issued, we need to do significant homework to understand what is the additional risk an investor is willing to take in return for having, you know, a water bond, and where they can put on their flag, okay, we support better water management. We're willing to take a little extra risk that we don't get the full return on our investment. But figuring that out and putting this in the market is something we're going to invest at the World Bank together with the IFC. A significant amount of energy going forward. We've already increased our bond issuance. We do about $40 to $50 billion of bond to finance our operations per year, and a growing number of those have to be in that space. So that's certainly one area where we see more opportunity.
The 750 billion you're speaking about is almost the money needed to have the water safety and sanitation organized per year in the world. So just to give a magnitude of order. You spoke about creativity and innovation. I think mental innovation would be the biggest one. Really giving the right priorities, but there's so much technology that can help us. But on farmers level, just investing in agriculture and in R&D in agriculture is not a bad thing, because you can actually have plants that do have much less water stress, much better resistance, that is all natural. So and give priority to that and share that knowledge of best practice, best farm husbandry. Other things are linked with agriculture as these small farmers. Allow them to be motivated to be in that business or in that métier. That's another story. So it's the farmers with them that we're going to do it. It's with the farmers. It's not because of big ideas here, so here or there. It is the farmer on the ground, and bring him along, and that's another one. How do partnerships work? That was your first question. I think partnerships work when the partners are sharing the same common goal and motivation and conviction, and that is water in this case of Water Resource Group. Then the second part of success in a partnership is seeing through the perspective of time. Don't expect straight away, etc., and have that perspective of time. Third, it is each partner should have a role to play, and a clear role to play that is differentiated, but complementary. And that I think is also very clear. I mentioned, for example, that whatever project you have on water in the field should be owned by local authority, the village authority, the national authority, whatever. It should be owned by them. And we should not try, as a private sector, to try to own the project and all. That's not overall. Overall is different. And having that complementarity very clear is another reason. Another argument or another condition for a good partnership is success. And you have mentioned that, Jürgen, to see that it works. There's nothing more motivational than to see that, but you have to go for this. And I must say the Water Resource Group has been wise in not trying to overarch or to embrace too much at the same time, because there's so many of these initiatives that are big words, nice on platforms and all, but they don't get traction. And they're lost in the desert. And that is not the Water Resource Group. And that's why we, after 14 years, we're in 14 countries. We are frustrated. It should be more, yes, but the 14 we are in is working, and it's getting traction, and it's going to snowball. And that's the motivation why we're here also. And we had our council, and after each council, we are more motivated to scale up. So that's why partnership work, I think.
Last but not least, Mr. Gillette, yeah.
No, I think my co-panelists have said the essential ingredients that are important for collaboration. But what I would add is aligning priorities, understanding the problem the same way is important. What I have seen often where it lacks is how do we actually do it on the ground, and that cannot be something that can be solved in this kind of forums. That's something that you actually have to take an investor, a financier, going on the ground, working with local governments, and delivering a project that is not only very nice when you put in place the infrastructure, and but that is going to be sustainable, and it's going to be maintained, and it's going to last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and benefit that population in that country. And that is, I think, where sometimes we don't close that gap. The sustainability. We can put a lot of money into infrastructure up front, but how to make it sustainable is a different ballgame. Thank you.
Thank you. We're out of time. I do want to end by thanking the panelists. We're not just unlocking innovation and financing, but also unlocking innovation in financing. Ecosystem partnerships, water is life, and we want to partner for life, right? And most importantly, also, how do we organize ourselves, not just at the global level? I think global conversations, understanding of the science, connecting that to policy is very important. But we also want to look at how to cascade this to the local levels and regional activities to sustain and develop, scale the impact. So on that note, thank you all, and I'll invite the next session and panel on stage. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session. This session, as you know, is about unlocking both innovation and finance. And we have a very distinguished panel here, and we can hear from them how they see this, both on the financial side and also on the innovation side. Quick word on who the panelists are. I think, They don't need much introduction, but I'll quickly say who they are. We have Ms. Estelle Brashidinov. She's the CEO of Veolia. And we have Ms. Ezgi Barcenas. She's the Chief Sustainability Officer for AB InBev. Mr. James Quincy, Chairman and CEO of the Coca-Cola Company. And we have Honorable Minister Senjo Muchunu, who's the Minister of Water and Sanitation, Government of South Africa. And also Honorable Minister Sri Gajendra Singh Shekhawat, who's the Minister of Water Resources, Government of India. My name is Sudipta Sarkar. I'm the Interim Program Manager for 2030 WRG that's putting together this session. I think we've all been energized in what's happened last week or earlier this week, in these various sessions that we attended. Today is Friday, session's coming to an end. I think, and let's think of what we can take away. And we'll also hear from these panelists on their thoughts so that as we all go back to our offices, to different countries, we can take away some key messages that we want to implement. I think, the focus really should be not only on the policy and the thoughts, but what can we do in terms of actions. So that as introduction, I'm going to turn first to you. Veolia, of course, you've been involved in many parts of the world. You've done many things in different countries, but what do you think drives innovation? And can you give some good examples of innovation?
I guess it was said in the previous panel, but measures get done. We've seen the last few years a lot of evolution in the CO2 mindset, and I would suggest that we try and do the same with water. So what about we have a net zero target in water in the same way I have with net zero target in CO2. And then we measure the trajectories, be they of cities or industries or agriculture. That's a way to get things done, in my opinion, because it was said previously that maybe we should change the title from 2030 to 2035. I would suggest we don't, because we need to scale up and we need to speed up. We have part of the solution, so what about we deliver them as opposed to wait and have other talks? So in a way, the question for me is how do we scale up? How do we speed up? And in terms of innovation, I think two things have been mentioned. One is innovation on governance, and the other one is innovation on the technical and social aspect of it. So innovation on governance, we need to put everybody around the table. That has been said, and partnership. And everybody we need, of course, framework from governments and legislation. That's absolutely needed. We need basin governance, and that's the big problem with water. It's cross boundaries. So basin governance, which we have very good experience in France and in the Senegal, is a very, very good way of putting together local authorities in whatever form they have, local communities, as well as the various users, so from agriculture to industry, because we always forget industry is consuming 20% of the water in the world, as well as private company to deliver on what they do well, which is to leverage from innovation, to leverage from their experience across the globe to deliver on objectives which were set by public entities altogether. So why is private sector can be super helpful in that, using the technologies and using the footprint. You've mentioned the fact that Veolia is involved in 5 continents, and we serve water to more than 100 million inhabitants in the world. We've had a lot of experience, which now we know what we can take from. In Chile, minus 75% river flow in the rivers which goes into Santiago de Chile, and in the last 10 years, which is enormous. And we still provide water to Santiago. How do we do that? Conservation of water, of course, we can do a lot, and we've done. Putting sensors into networks so you avoid leakage, or actually you detect them before they happen or when they're happening. Leakage network is enormous in very, very much part of the globe, as well as water recycling. And we have the technologies to do that. We even in Windhoek in Namibia are able to produce potable water from wastewater, so which is, as you can imagine, the highest standard. You use membrane, you use resin, you use all this technology. And I said as well for industry, 20% of the water is used by industry. We have good examples, and actually good example in this room, and I don't know if they will be too shy to mention what their own company does, but we have a very good example in the food and bev industry with some soda producers. You can follow where I'm going, which a few years ago were between 6 and 8 liters of water consumed per liter of soda produced. And now they're down to 1.4, 1.6, depending on the plant. How do you do that? By having companies like us providing them with a solution to reuse wastewater, to save water, and so on and so forth. So partnership, governance at the basin level, and leverage from what the private sector can do well.
Thank you. From Viola's side, you're a water provider. And from your side, from AB InBev side, you are like an actually water consumer, water user. So what are the innovations you're bringing from your side?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. I would agree with Estelle. So at ABI, as the world's leading brewer with operations across nearly 50 countries around the world, we see the far-reaching impacts of climate change and understand the value of water. For years, we've also invested in water efficiency improvements. But if I take a step back, the way we think about sustainability is the ultimate brief for design. And water sits within that. So how we rethink the design of our teams, our processes, and our partnership models really plays a big role in how we drive innovation. So number one would be our teams, how we think about the value of water. An earlier panel also spoke about this, how we engage our finance teams to build sustainable finance frameworks so that we can improve and enhance our resource allocation. How we engage with our R&D teams to better understand what seed varieties are needed for barley for them to be more drought tolerant, weather resistant, and improve climate adaptation of our farmers around the world. How we engage with our energy and fluids directors in our operations or agronomists that go out to the field and work with the farmers. We really take a cross-functional approach to governing water. So this is one point. How we think about our processes is another one. You could say, we know our business quite well, we're going to continue to operate that we've always done, but we actually don't do that. We say, here are the challenges we're still looking to solve. We don't have solutions for it within our existing supply chain partnerships. So how do we go and identify those breakthrough solutions? So for this, back in 2018, we launched a 100+ accelerator program that actually Coke is now a partner with us on it, where we go and we identify startups that are going to come in and help us tackle some of these shared challenges, and water is a big piece of that. So how we identify those innovative solutions to reuse, recycle water, how we bring in machine learning to continue to improve optimization within our businesses, how we think about satellite or aerial imagery for real-time data on water quality, or how we even partner with startups to better understand our nature impact as we start looking into it more deliberately from a biodiversity angle. So again, looking for those innovative solutions that are outside our current supply chain and bringing them in to pilot, test, and look for scalable solutions that we can then share with the world, with our industry partners. And third and last piece is how we think about innovative partnership models. And I think Water Resources Group is a huge example of that as a founding member of it over a decade ago, including in projects in South Africa, for example. We are finding new and innovative ways to involve key players in local regions where water users can come together to improve governance, to improve water management, to share learnings and best practices. So as I think about innovation, I would say how we think about our teams, processes, and partnerships.
Wonderful, thanks. Very comprehensive approach. To Coca-Cola, you're of course a global company and you're well known also for your water stewardship around the world. The question is, how do you make it sustainable? And how can you bring a systemic change through this public-private collaboration?
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, we've been on this water journey for a while, and the Water Resources Group, we set ourselves a goal of getting past water neutral in 2020. We got there a while ago. Last year, returned over 160% of the water we use into the community and into the environment. And the way we've been able to work on water, let me just use 2 examples of what's possible. Firstly, we see our role, we have a philanthropic arm, and we work with other philanthropies to drive money into seed projects that are disruptors, that are innovators, We provide a badge effect by investing in them. We recently did some stuff with one called Imagine H2O, 175 projects over the last few years. And through the leverage that they can achieve of philanthropic contributions, they've brought $850 million into projects to drive innovative, disruptive solutions in water. So there's a piece where we provide seed money that brings in other players and World Bank type financing that drives things forward. The other example is where we play an even more active role, where really we're trying to solve problems that where water is a piece of the puzzle, but not the total puzzle. So an example of that would be, is where our role is to create the market and to galvanize the supply chain around a solution. So let's take agriculture, which is always one of the biggest problems in water. Actually, the example was in India around things like sugarcane and mangoes, where we're the largest buyer. We essentially said, look, there's a multi-factor problem. They use too much water, the water availability is going down, their incomes aren't high enough to keep them on the farm, and we need more mangoes, or we need more sugar. Working with them across the supply chain to put in the irrigation allows them to grow more fruit in the fruit circular economy. So they double their production, double their incomes, they use less water, and we can help drive a supply chain. So there's a set of problems that aren't just water, where the private sector can be the market creator and the galvanizer of the supply chain within the construct of what the state government help us do it. So seed money, create the market.
That would lead to sustainability too. Wonderful.
Also good for climate.
That's right. Can I turn to the Honorable Minister from South Africa? We talked about innovation on operations, innovation on technology, but maybe from South Africa's perspective, what way are you thinking of bringing in new financing? Can you have different innovations to address the water, not only the water supply issue, but also the water resource management issue? What would be your approach on financing?
Thank you very much for this opportunity to share our experiences in terms of innovation that goes to financing water. Let me first make a point, just a general point, that says that I appreciate that we're talking about private sector financing of water, but I think we also have to talk about partnership in the public sector alone, because it's playing quite an important role. When governments link up at a world level or sign bilaterals, it works. When they cooperate in terms of cross-border or cross-boundary, it works. But when also internally in a country, various departments in one country cooperate, it works as well, in a way. But let me get to the topic directly. In South Africa, we know and we've accepted that we don't have enough money. And we're not going to have enough money for quite some time. And we have to have a deficit in terms of providing water for agriculture, industry, and domestic. And that is an established point. But on the other hand, we do have a fairly vibrant financial sector in the country. Not only vibrant, but willing to work with the public sector that's worked with us in government to augment and finance and assist in whatever way that all of us see fit. So the attitude of the financial sector in South Africa is that, okay, bring something that is tangible, something that is that makes sense for the markets and so on, and then we will get on board. To that effect, we've moved some way. There are a number of examples. There's an example of us working with the mining sector in two provinces, one Northern Cape, another one in Limpopo, which is one of the provinces, where mining is, came together, and we then struck a deal signed last October to the tune of 1.3 billion to finance to finance water from a dam to mining
operations, but also to the community. Because unlike before, where you could just finance a huge water scheme, but just for mines, and you exclude the needs of the communities around. And that was the old time. This time, we've changed. We've said when the pipe passes, whoever is financing it, remember that people who are poor around the area and they need to provide it for power. And they're bringing in their 12 billion or bring out 12 billion. It's a 50-50 basis. It's one example that the private sector is willing to work with us, and we're seeing it and we're learning. There may be a trust deficit, but you prevail, you persuade, and it works. But the other example that we have gone into is where we're building, we're going to be building very soon a large dam in Devon, in KwaZulu-Natal, and the problem of financing that. The markets were willing to cover 50% thereof, and we then had to come up with the option of a blended finance. We get the municipalities around for an offtake, to agree on an offtake, to finance the other 50%. We were almost left with 1 month or so to finalize this by one municipality, which is eThekwini itself, to sign off, but they are advanced in terms of the process. So all of a sudden, you are able to finance quite a large dam, and you'll be able to provide water. But it didn't depend on your fiscus, because as I said before, we don't have money, we just have little of it. And therefore, we sometimes, when you are squeezed and you have a problem, and you don't want to fold your arms and cry, ideas do come, innovation comes, and it works. But we also have set up what we call a partnership office with a development bank called Southern African Development Bank, wherein we collaborate, have an office, develop programs and ideas, and on a daily basis to say what innovation in terms of finance, more innovation that can go there. This being a private sector bank, of course, they are clued on finance and so on, and they then develop a number of options, and it's growing, it's working. But what the bonus thereof is that you then regain your credibility as government because you're working with the bank, but at the same time, it's going to go to communities, but also for business and so on. So that's the experience that we've had to go through to learn, to make up for what we don't have in the fiscus. And we believe so far that it's working. It's just that it is slow. We need to speed it up, more energy into it, and we trust that it is going to work.
Thank you. Thank you. Of course, WRG 2030 has a program in South Africa. I hope you use that program also to kind of expand and see what you can do in terms of bringing in the private sector.
Yes.
We also have a program in India with WRG 2030, and I think there's a lot happening in the state of Uttar Pradesh, and that is a very good example. And it's a kind of a flagship example, I think, of WRG 2030, which we plan to take it to different parts of the world. But to come back to the portfolio that you cover, it's a very large portfolio, and I'm sure the challenges are large for a large country like India. But I'd like to shift the discussion a little more on the economic side. The water is closely linked to the economy. And what would be your approach in first making the strategic decisions and also to communicate? Because water business is hard business. People don't change so fast, but maybe the cost of inaction is high, and that's the narrative I think you can think of. But we are also thinking in those lines, but I'd like to hear from your perspective, how do you make the connection between water and economy, which can eventually lead to change?
Thank you very much. As you rightly said, that my portfolio is very big and challenges are also very big. And a country like India, which has a huge geospatial variation and the different type of challenges in all the states are there, often we say is that too little and too much. But in India, it's both the situations are there. Being the stateless subject, water is a stateless subject as per our constitution. So primary ownership and responsibility lies with the states in the federal system. Agriculture again is the stateless subject to be addressed primarily by the states only. So the primary responsibility to address the water subject and agriculture being the largest consumer, to connect the role between and to connect directly on the people on the ground and the system lies with the states. So we have, as you have mentioned, that in the state of Uttar Pradesh, that they have taken some new innovations and they have entered into agreement with the state of Gujarat. There are many of innovations have been taken up. There are multiple sectors. Say it is demand side, there are plenty of innovations where the public is not to do much, but the government has to take care of. The other is the supply side, where government and the public both will have to join hands together for better results. The third thing is the policy side, where government will have to take an announced policy. I just like to mention 1, 2 or 3 things. As you have mentioned, that direct seeding of rice initiative, which is taken in the state of Uttar Pradesh. This is being done in all rice growing states. But apart from that, now we all are aware that India is overproducing rice than its capacity, its requirement. And paddy is a water intense crop. So just to diversify from the one crop to other, that is important. And as Honorable Prime Minister started speaking about advocating about the millets and growing millets and eating millets, that is a solution where we can save water by policy initiatives. Another thing which I would like to mention is, as state of Haryana have taken initiative that, because in knowing the fact that the biggest incentive for the farmers to grow a particular crop, maybe it is wheat or the paddy, is the procurement by the government. What is the system which is being done in the government in our country? So to diversify from one crop to other, the government have taken some policy initiatives, and they have assured them for procurement of whatever crop they grow in alternative with the paddy or the wheat. And simultaneously, if any viability gap is there, then that gap is being subsidized by the government. That is how we can save water. And the third thing is where we can work with new innovations is the recycle and reuse. So as far as the recycle is concerned, many innovations have been taken in India. I would like to mention one thing, that in the city of Bangalore, the surrounding districts, they are so water stressed districts, and the water dependability for the water, which has gone as low as somewhere around 400 meters. The waters, and almost it was depleted. The state government, they have taken an initiative that the entire Suez water which comes out from the city of Bangalore, it is being treated at tertiary level, and that water is being filled in the water tanks, the natural tanks which are there, exist there in all those 4 districts which are water stressed districts. And a period of 2 years only, by filling those tanks with the tertiary treated water, the water level has risen up to, which had gone as below as 400 meters. Now that has come up to 30, 40 meters. So these type of innovations will have to be taken in all segments of water, on the supply side, on the demand side, on the recycle and reuse side, and simultaneously in the policy side. And if it is being dealt with the holistic manner, to address all nook and corner with the innovations in the financing also, the new financing models also be taken up, like as we have leveraged our urban bodies and municipalities to raise fund. In Amrit's mission also, we have leveraged them to issue their bonds, which are being backed by the government, so that they can have more finances. There are in India, as we all are aware that we are working so hard and rapidly, we are creating infrastructure for providing drinking water to each and every household. So to finance that again, the companies can be created, mega companies, which can finance those projects and earn from the villagers, they can repay from the villagers what they collected. And that is successfully being done in state of Gujarat already. Vasmo is working for last almost 2 decades. That also can be replicated, and many of new initiatives can be taken up.
Thank you. I'm sure your challenges are large, but then also you're doing it well in terms of addressing them. We're short on time, so let's have a quick round here, the second round. To you first, Estelle, what do you need from the public sector? We have 2 public sector officials here. What would you need from the public sector to be successful?
Again, as I said, everybody aligned, same interest and measure would be the short answer. And in terms of financing, I'm not saying there is always everywhere some financing, but some financing exists. So I would contribute to what was said earlier on. We need financing not only to be on the developing of the infrastructure, but as well to think on the governance and what happens next. Where is it to put a value on water, who pays for what, and to have the O&M contract, and otherwise this is just a start, but it ends very quickly. So I guess that would be my short answer to that one. Not for the public sector. We need the public again framework, basin governance, and then have the private sector do its best. And in terms of financing, don't only think of the infrastructure, think beyond of how it's going to be used.
Yes, and you need a broad base to bring the financing in. Sure. Same question to you. What do you need from the public sector?
So I think private sector can bring in the capabilities, the ideas, the innovation, the boots on the ground. But the ultimate guardian of water is the public sector, and we look to the public sector to create the regulatory backbones that are going to support these types of innovative partnership models, or an enabling environment that's going to allow startups to thrive. And we really need to be thinking about the startup ecosystem around the world in many, many markets, because they will be a big part of the solution for us as we look to identify and scale ways that we can measurably improve the health of watersheds and improve water availability, quality, and access.
Thanks. And for you, what's the kind of a key takeaway from the conference and also the session that we had, this session and the earlier Governing Council session? What would be different when you start your work on Monday morning?
I think I'm very encouraged by firstly that there is a UN Water Week,
yeah.
And specifically on the Water Resources Group, a big focus. I mean, we have been going a while at the Water Resources Group, which is why, of course, we're getting close to the 2030. I think what's encouraging is the increase in the number of people who are getting engaged, the increase in the focus on each of the key actors understanding how they fit into the scheme, public, private, and society. The galvanizing of finance to come to the table. We were talking in the last session. Everyone's heard of green bonds, but no one's heard of water bonds or blue bonds. So the amount of financing coming to the table on water, I think, is going to start ramping up, which is what it's going to take. A lot of money needs to be deployed to fix infrastructure, to change practices. And I think what's encouraging is there's more people engaged in, okay, let's get this done.
Thank you, and thank you for the support received from Coca-Cola on the 2030 WRG. I know you've been a long-term partner, and so has AB InBev. Maybe there are others in the room who want to join us. If you're interested, please let us know. To the Minister, I think you heard from the private sector, but from your side, what do you expect from the private sector? What more can they do? You talked about financing. It could be on that. It could be on innovation.
Firstly, I think that the private sector, after this conference, coming 44 years after the last one that was held, I think there's going to be growing awareness, or at least I pray for and expect that there will be increased awareness that investments in water is not water under the bridge. that there's life in investing, there's profit, there's all of that. And I think this conference, I mean, the world is going to be benefiting from the elevation of water to this level. And with that, there will come much more awareness and interest on the side of the private sector. And if this conference doesn't impress the private sector, I would be shocked and I would be surprised. But secondly, I think they are taking from us, the public sector, that we are very keen and interested in working with the private sector, not only from the point of view of us not having money, but because it serves the mutual interest. Like they were saying before the panel here, saying partnership means in the main, you have a common interest to see. And therefore, I think that we should talk to each other, get closer, work more, work together, much more than we've done in the past. And all of us will benefit. If I could just end up with one example, of course, in South Africa, we are seeing some investment in the form of loans, even in the form of loans, where you say, this is a business plan, and you get to convince the markets that it makes sense. And in some cases, they also contribute and so on. And then they finance that. So I think we just have to think more and more on innovative ways, but the need is there. But there's also business interests will be catered for as well. There's no doubt about that. And therefore, let's move together, hand in hand, going forward. Thank you.
Wonderful. Sir, to you, obviously the private sector is working more in India and they can do more. But very often we see there is social reluctance to bring the private sector. I think the technology, the financing that exists, but there is also this kind of perception that the private sector will come and do certain things that the people don't want. How do you overcome that? And maybe you can also give some perspectives on how do you see the private sector supporting India?
Traditionally, majority of the funding in the water sector is being done by the governments. Yeah. Through the public funding, public spending. But now time has come when we have to understand that the only public spending is not going to suffice the purpose and meet out the purpose, because the way the challenges are coming up. Simultaneously, the way the government, like Indian government, we are making a huge infrastructure for providing drinking water as well as the water to each and every farm. This is going to create a huge burden for the government in the future for operation and maintenance also. So in that sector, if the innovative solutions can be derived, as we have introduced a new model of hybrid annuity model in our Suez treatment plant constructions, where the government have to pay only 40% upfront to the concessionaires who is developing the infrastructure, and the rest of the 60% can be guaranteed by the government that you will be paying in annuities, but can be financed through the bank or the private sector. These type of innovations can be multiplied, and they need to be multiplied for a sustainable future. Simultaneously, as I mentioned that in our earlier meeting also, sorry, that we need to leverage our local self-government also, and we'll have to support and to support them for raising the funds from the private sector, and they can repay, and the guarantees can be backed by the government. This is the only way where we can attract private finance into water sector, which is the need of the hour.
A quick question for you. India is now leading the G20 discussions, and water is of course part of the story. What would be key stories that you would tell the world through the G20?
See, in India, we have a lot of things to tell the world about the water. A lot of things. The scale, what we are working. If I mention the numbers of drinking water connections, what we have to give in as to meet out the SDG targets, that is 194 million houses to be connected. And so far, in last 3.5 years, or less than 3.5 years, we were able to provide it to 120 million houses. So it is, and in all the segment, we are running the world's largest dam rehabilitation program. We are running the world's largest aquifer mapping program. We are running the world's largest sanitation program. We are running the world's largest behavioral change program. So whatever we are doing is the world's largest. So we have a lot to tell to the countries which are coming in that to take participation in the G20 meeting. But simultaneously, my view is that water is a challenge which is not a challenge for a country or for a state. It is a global issue, and everybody is going to be impacted in one way or other. Maybe they might be having, the countries or the states, they might be having too much of the water, abundance of the water, but still this challenge is going to impact them in some or other way. So it is a global issue, and we need to work more closely, in more unison, and we have to, with the huge and greater cooperation is required. That is what the message which I should.
Thank you. I think partnerships are needed between the public sector and private sector to make this whole water security challenge. G2G, of course, and private to private also. So wonderful. I'd like to thank the panelists for this discussion. We had rich discussions here. And hopefully we've taken some lessons here that we can apply. get started. I don't know, the mic's working. Thank you. So let's get started. I think, we're waiting for another panelist to join us. But I think, this panel here doesn't need much introduction, but I'll still kind of introduce who they are. First, starting from the far left, we have Minister of Foreign Affairs from Hungary. But Mr. Peter Sigiaro, right? Then we have Ms. Sabrina Suzanne from Suez. Then we have Mr. Werner Baumann from Bayer, and Peter Lohan from Conrad Hilton Foundation. On the far right. Depends how you're looking at it, where you're sitting from. I think, you got the introduction when we were talking about in the first panel. It really, WRG 2030 is a platform where we bring the public sector and private sector together. And that's the reason we have a combination of public and private people here to talk about how collaboratively things can be done differently when it comes to addressing water security challenges. So that's the whole purpose. And we really want the discussions to be action-oriented, like I said in my first panel. So I know because we are short of time, I'll go directly to the Minister of Hungary. You've been involved with 2030 WRG for some time from Hungary. And the question is, what is your expectations in the longer run, and how can WRG do more to kind of meet your expectations?
First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you very much for including me into the panel. If you follow international politics, then you might be aware that the Hungarian government is kind of frequently under charges, among which being far left was not yet there. And it would be very, 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 very challenging to find any aspects in our government policies which would comply with that. But thank you so much for including me. So, given geography, we are a Central European country, landlocked one, being located in a basin. So this means that we understand that water is an asset, but can be a serious risk as well, given the fact that all of our waters are stemming or arriving from other countries into Hungary. And we all know that water can be a source of international conflicts, as we just experienced. Water can be another root cause for migration, be it too much or too little. And if you look at the natural catastrophes recently, we understand that 70% of those who died in nature-related catastrophes are dying of catastrophes in relationship with water. So that means that we have to be aware of that. Hungary is a country of rivers, and being a country of rivers, you have to be ready for tackling either floods or droughts, especially in a country like ours, having a very strong tradition and heritage in agriculture, and also a country which I told you has rivers stemming from the neighboring countries. We have to be ready for, let's say, settling the, I wouldn't say conflicts, but challenging relationship with neighbors on this issue, given the fact that if there's an irresponsible behavior regarding water in a neighbor country, it definitely has an impact on us in a negative way. So, but how to make this situation advantageous for yourself in Hungary? We have made a strategic decision that we have invested a lot in water industry, in water management, as an outcome of which we were able to develop one of the most highly developed water industries in the world, I might say. And I'm representing a small country. I have to be, I wouldn't say shy, but moderate enough. And I have to be focused when it comes to industries which are world class. There's some water industry is definitely among them. So therefore we have put together programs to an extent of 800 million euros to support countries who are in need because of too much or too little water, from Sri Lanka through Vietnam to Cape Verde, where we offer the Hungarian technology and where we offer the Hungarian financial assets as well. I think that we should go forward now with more geographical focuses on two specific areas: Western Balkans. I'm pretty sure I'm biased because we are in the neighborhood, and Central Asia. I'm pretty sure I'm biased because we have some common cultural heritage with that region. So I think it would be a great forward progress from all of us if we could move forward geographically towards these two regions. And 2 years ago, 2021, we signed an agreement with you in the framework of which we offered $10 million, out of which $3 million have been already paid for this term. And if you ask me what is the way forward, I think it's more donors. So we are not the richest country on earth, so we should really convince other countries to understand the possible very serious challenges stemming from water-related issues and join us by being donor.
Thank you. Of course, we appreciate the support we received from Hungary, and I hope we can go on this journey as we're starting this program in Kazakhstan also. A question to Suez. I think in Suez, of course, you do a lot of technical work, but to be successful on the technical side, you also need financing. And how do you see the future of financing, given the huge needs? And how do you see the global financial architecture? What can you do from your company? Because financing is critical.
Happy to be here first, and hello everyone. First of all, let's agree on the issues to address. In developing countries, the need for water and sanitation is increasing drastically. Yeah. And there is, at the same time, a gap in the funding. Yeah. For example, in Africa, the water sector attracts only 10 to 12% of investment in the continent. That is not a lot, yeah, 10 to 12%. And the funding gap is estimated in Africa from $50 to $60 billion. Huge. Few reasons for this. So first of all, there are few bankable projects, so we need to do something about this. Lack of credit worthiness of African utilities, and lack of global governance. Now, talking about mature markets, they also suffer from the effect of climate change, yeah, as we saw last summer and we still see. And significant capital is also required to improve conservation of water resources, notably by reducing water losses and investing in reuse. We talk a lot about reuse at the moment, and also in other solutions like desalination. In general, there will be a need for more and more technology and more innovation in water, and that's where companies like us, like Suez, can and will play a key role. In addition, there is one issue, which is the price of water. And the price of water is very political and very sensitive, and local authorities remain reluctant to make the necessary investments. Mm-hmm. And that is an issue that we don't talk enough about, yeah, also. So investments are urgent and critical to cope with demographic change, but also to ecological transition. And I believe that the support from the IFIs, to come to your questions, is essential to facilitate the development of sustainable projects. And I see the following challenges which need to be addressed. The first one is a legal and commercial framework which ensure strong governance, and in order to reduce sector risks, especially in developing countries, as mentioned before, with political risk insurance and also payment guarantees. We need this. And I have an example of a project that we do in Angola for access to water, where this project was made feasible and bankable due to the involvement and payment guarantees made from BPI, yeah, or BPI, Banque d'Investissement. The second topic is we need to ensure that local authorities and utilities have the skill to operate the assets after the assets have been built. And this needs to be done also. And as a third challenge, the financing should be also including for the operation and maintenance phase, not only for the construction. We see too many examples of you build a great treatment, water treatment plant, and then it's not performing in the operation phase. And we have another very good example. I always try to give example in Tunisia, where the World Bank is doing something quite innovative because they finance also the maintenance part of the assets, which is new in our sector. So as you see, the challenges are identified, concrete examples already exist, and now it's up to the stakeholders to partner. We will talk about this later, and to roll out.
Thank you. And I used to work in Indonesia, so I know the example you talked about. So turning to Bayer, you've been involved in the agricultural value chain for a long time. But now with climate change, how will your business change? How are you doing things differently to address this need to do things differently because of climate?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, and thanks for the question. Bayer today is actually very large, the biggest ag inputs company in the world, with a product offering ranging from biological and chemical crop protection over to seeds, and also into digital farming and agronomic advice. And given the fact that we are operating as an integral part of the food chain that stands for about 70% of global water use, as one of the issues that is of paramount importance when it comes to feeding the world, not only today, but also in 20 years from now when we're going to have 9 to 10 billion people. The question is, of course, how we can respond to water scarcity, but also climate change. The company's roots are in innovation. We are an innovation company, and we firmly believe that a lot of the problems, while we do have some solutions today, can only be solved going forward with better, more resilient, and also more sustainable solutions. In some areas still need to be developed. Specifically for some of the examples, not everything relates to technology. A lot of it also needs simply a coalition of the willing, where we bring people together who have different parts of a solution that will ultimately, with a farmer-centric view, enable farmers to do the right thing. If we don't get there, none of our good ideas will work, because we need to win the willingness of the farmers to change practice and then to drive for better livelihoods and outcomes as a result of that. So if I start with that one, we are a founding member of something that is called Better Life Farming Initiatives. We established about 1,600 centers in India, up and until now it's going to be 4,000 in a couple of years, and we teamed up with funding institutions like the IFC, with your irrigation leaders such as Netafim. We are bringing to the table seeds, crop protection, and agronomic advice. But we've also reached out to grower associations, and other international organizations, a total of 20, to help farmers operate their fields better. So what is the outcome? Today, people who joined with their operations, they've been able to double their yields. They've been able to triple their incomes. And with that, they have completely new perspectives also in terms of their own sustainability of their livelihoods, because all of a sudden they are, let's say, in play when it comes to access to finance, which as a pure subsistence operation, you're not necessarily able to do. Secondly, climate change and more resilient crops. Rice is a very good example. Rice stands for about 40% of all global freshwater irrigation use. It's one of the most important staple crops that a lot of people, billions of people, feed off. So the question is, how can we reduce that huge water footprint which at the same time comes with a significant methane footprint of about 12% of all methane emissions globally. We've developed an approach that looks at dry seeded rice, so a different technology with irrigation support that allows to produce the same amount of rice with about 25 to 30% less water use. Right. And at the same time, it benefits farmers because it costs them 25% less to actually operate that system compared to wet farmed rice. Another example that stretches beyond the developing world is short stature corn. It is a corn variety that grows not as high. It is more resilient. It's not that susceptible to logging with strong storms and winds. It binds more carbon due to a stronger rooting system, and it uses substantially less nutrients, which is another very good example where we can reduce the resource footprint across a number of things, such as soil, such as nutrient uptake, such as fertilizer, and beyond that, of course, also water uptake. Last thing, as a very tangible example, is a coalition that looks at the development of drought-resistant maize in sub-Saharan Africa. We are providing, as a leading company when it comes to seeds technology in maize, we are providing insected and drought-resistant genetics to that initiative, so that based on these genetics, that are varieties that are stronger and withstanding drought can be developed for drought-affected areas. Just as 3 examples.
Thank you. I think what you said about involving the farmers, that's critical. The challenge is, of course, you work at the individual farm levels, but how can you aggregate that to have larger benefits for the country, especially when it comes to climate? Talking about innovation from Hilton Foundation, we know the model that you have on how to provide better water services to the rural areas, and you have a unique institutional arrangement on that. How do you scale that up, given the large needs in the sector?
Thanks, Suripto. Let me start with kind of an editorial comment on the title of the session, Unlocking Innovation and Financing. Although there's been a lot of cool innovation discussed here, for my money, the 80% ought to be on the financing question. SDG 6 ought to be one of the most straightforward goals to deliver on. It's crucial for human existence, so we know there's demand. People are willing to pay for it at the household level, at the entrepreneur level, willing to borrow for it at the governmental level. And most of the technology exists, at least for the provision of drinking water. But because the SDGs got gavelled in without a business or a financing plan, we're all doing a lot of catch-up. And I would ask my corporate colleagues here on this panel and others, would you all have started an enterprise like this? Or would you have planned the implementation and the financing in a more systematic way? And I think that leads into your question, Suripto, because our personal perspective is going from the household and local entrepreneur level and linking that to government regulation and to capital. And I wanted to give 3 just quick examples on that. In Uganda, we've supported water.org. I think founder Gary White is somewhere here in the audience. Basically to build the capacity of local banks to develop and offer microloans. We gave $2.5 million, and they were able to make 20,000 loans out of that, that impacted up to 500,000 people. And more than $20 million have been mobilized. Small investments can have big snowball effects. There's a lot of demand out there. In Ethiopia, we're looking into the feasibility of carbon credits resulting from a shift from diesel to solar water pumping for boreholes. And the Ethiopian government estimates 10,000 boreholes exist. So there's a potential there. I think that could be very important both at the local and the national level. I lived or worked in rural Mali for 8 years, and I used to always say there was no running water, no electricity, no paved roads. That's no longer the case. In villages, you're starting to see piped water systems. And we had really interesting information here about the break-even point for investments in pipe to premises is much quicker than on kiosks or any other kind of hub and spoke provision. And so I think there's a lot of interesting potential there, but it has to be effectively brought to the attention of both regulators and capital sources. That's what we try to do. Thanks.
Thanks. I think staying on this theme of financing, going back to Hungary, I'm sorry I got my left and right confused earlier. So, but of course, Hungary, you get some money from the EU. You also have your own resources. So, so two questions actually on the financing. From like, inside the country, in Hungary, what do you do to kind of raise the money? How do you see the private money coming in to support the water sector? And how can that knowledge be taken overseas for other countries where financing is really a big challenge?
I wish you would be a prophet when you say that we get European funding. Because currently this is the biggest debate between Brussels and us, that because we are so badly behaving, we are not receiving, unfortunately, European funds at all. But thanks God, our economic growth and the FDI flowing into the country to record heights can ensure that we can not only continue to operate the country, but we can take part in international actions like the water-related one. How we, let's say, combine the private capital with the state capital is the following. We have been implementing a methodology which is called the Tide Aid Credit Program, which means that we give a loan to countries in need, for which they do not have to pay interest rate. The interest rate is being paid by the state budget itself. And we give this loan through our Exim Bank. In case these water-related projects in these countries are being carried out in a way that there's at least a 50% of Hungarian contribution, be it technology, be it equipment, be it engineering service. And in this framework, we have already partly allocated, partly already spent 800 million euros already. 800 million euros in 15 countries. I gave you some examples. I have not mentioned Indonesia, although it's in there. I have not mentioned Uganda before, although it's in there. So it's mostly African, Central Asian, Caucasian, Southeast Asian, and Western Balkan countries. And they do have to pay back this loan, once again, with 0% interest rate in 15 years, at the beginning of which there is a 3-year-long grace period. And through this, let's say, pattern, through this methodology, we are able to support our Hungarian companies to invest in countries in need, and we give assistance, help, financial aid to the countries in need by taking over the interest rate. So this is kind of win-win-win situation. The Hungarian companies are winning, the countries in need are winning, and at the end of the day, the Hungarian economy is winning as well.
Thank you. I think you've taken also a global perspective on how to take financing overseas. Sticking on to the theme of financing, I'll come to you, but before that, let's also welcome Honorable Alice Wahome. She's the Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Irrigation from Kenya. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Back to financing. I think, from the private sector, we always are looking for also commercial money. And commercial money, the cost of capital is higher than what often tariffs can afford. So how do you bridge the gap? And maybe you can give an example on how you raise commercial money for some of your operations, especially in the emerging markets.
Maybe I will start saying that I strongly believe in the future of public-private partnership. And especially now, I think there is more and more need for public-private partnership. And I hope that this conference will help to accelerate. And there are already good examples of public-private partnership. I want to give you 2 examples. One in Australia, Victoria desalination plant. That's the biggest desalination plant in the southern hemisphere, where Suez and his partner have constructed, and now we operate this plant with 100% renewable energy. I think that's key, the renewable energy part also. In Macau, water concession. In this water concession, we have invested, or Suez has invested, over the life of this concession, 400 million euros with our partners. And what we did also in this concession with our smart digital solutions, we have been able to improve the performance of the water network from 75% to 93%. With digital solutions, and this means 2 million cubic meters of water saved every year. So these are concrete examples how with private or public-private partnership you can make a difference. Sure. And I believe this is the future, because the future is not that everyone will continue to do his own things. We need to partner. We need company like us. We need to bring technology innovation. We need to work together with the public authorities, and time is over that everyone has his own agenda in order to make a difference, and to have an impact.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the minister has to leave. Yes, thank you for coming. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Best to all of you.
Thank you. There is, of course, so much to talk about when it comes to public-private partnership, financing, innovation, etc. But going back to your earlier theme of reaching the farmers, from Bayer, what have you done to kind of talk directly to farmers? How have you helped them? Are you tracking their growth in income? Because we want to learn a little more about how you engage directly about the program you talked about earlier.
I mean, that's one of the harder things to do, to reach farmers on the ground and really change their operating practice. So all of us are animals that live off experience, and what our forefathers told us to be good things, and changing that is one of the harder things to do. And we've heard it in other sessions during this week that the best thing is that you have good examples, that people can see how at a neighboring lot there's more productivity, which means there's more produce that can eventually be used to feed the family, or ideally also to provide for additional household income when you can sell it. And that's where these partnerships are so important, that we do something that is really comprehensively helping the farmer from the farmer's perspective. And it is then going to be complemented by things that food chain, which means food chain companies, off-takers, can further drive when it comes to certain sustainability of practices, when it comes to marketing, packaging, logistics support, because a lot of the perishable produce is going to die and not be really commercial due to lack of cold chain, too long transportation, and so on. And that's where these better life farming initiatives are so important, that they really take that comprehensive view. As I mentioned earlier, 1,600 of these centers do exist today. We reach roughly 20,000 villages going forward. Today we reach roughly 500,000 farmers. It's going to be 2 million farmers going forward, and that's also showing you how you can scale it. So we see the results on the ground, and then very importantly, also from companies and organizations like ours, we have to make sure that we stay on these themes. And to do that in organizations, you need to be clear about what the targets are, what the expectations are, and what people are being paid on. And you have to be able to track and trace progress, which we are doing with targets that were set for the period by 2030, where we want to reach 100 out of 550 million smallholders worldwide. So roughly 20% of smallholders globally we want to reach. in partnership with others to improve their livelihoods and get them out of subsistence. And it's an audited metric that we are reporting on every year, and that our management, including the board of management, is paid on. And let me tell you, it does work.
Wonderful. I think you have to go down to the grassroots level to happen. Peter, to your right, you have somebody from the public sector. So what do you need from the public sector to make some of your programs successful?
Sure. And I think we recognize the key role, indeed the overarching and mandated role of government as at various levels. Certainly as regulator, you don't often think of regulation as a public-private partnership, but it certainly is. The government sets limits in the interests of people, but also to attract capital into the area. So a couple of suggestions there. Just a clear legal framework and incentives for the private sector for their engagement in safe water delivery, and the promotion of cost-effective tariffs. We often see evidence that tariffs are not covering all the costs, but often regulations don't let them be increased. Two very practical things. And then one plug I wanted to make for a public-private partnership that was launched yesterday with the governments of Ghana, Uganda, and South Africa, the WHO, UNICEF, private sector, and NGOs about getting lead out of water systems, to think about water quality and not simply the provision of water. I think there is a strong corporate angle in this, in that the leaching comes mostly from hand pump components or from piping, but there's also a very strong regulation piece in that. And I think it's something that the governments, the private sector can lock arms over. And if I may be permitted, globalleadfreewater.org, sign up, and everyone can make a contribution to it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to the Honorable Cabinet Secretary. Maybe you can close out this session by talking about the challenges you see in Kenya when it comes to the needs on the financing, on innovation, and how do you see the private sector helping you, again, both on the financing side and also the innovation?
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me in this particular session, discussing a very important matter before us. And because we are all committed to SDG 6, I think it is a collective responsibility. For me, from a government perspective, as the Cabinet Secretary responsible to ensure that we have access to water, sanitation, and irrigation, that is food security for all Kenyans, then public financing against private financing or complementing private financing complementing public financing is critical, because the financing gap is huge. And if I were just to be, very, very blunt and candid, it's like we are about 10 years behind in terms of the facilities that we need to be able to deliver water services, get the necessary infrastructure for water sanitation, and then maybe infrastructure for irrigation, both at small scale holder level and commercial level. We are now opened up to commercial irrigation for purposes of production so that we can deal with food security. Of course, Africa being where it is in terms of drought, you can imagine that we will need to make very quick intervention at immediate, mid-term, and long-term. So financing gap in terms of my sector is huge. Economically, the country finds itself as a new administration with a lot of political goodwill and support from His Excellency the President. The public revenue is not sufficient to carry out that infrastructure. And therefore, that creates an opportunity, immediate opportunity for private investment. The good thing or good news is that our constitution, the legal framework, statutory, both statutory and regulatory, are in place, and it is possible to be able to engage, even today, the private sector under the PPP, public-private Partnership Act that is hosted by the Minister, Cabinet Secretary for Finance. And we have carried out several engagements with the private sector. Lately, there is good interest in investing. And maybe it's good to say the issue of water, there is a lot of concerns as to whether water will be bankable, whether water will be able to return on investment. And because the demand is higher than the supply, that tells you then what we need is to work out financing models that are responsive to the needs of the people, because we cannot treat water like any other maybe infrastructure and service. And therefore, we are open to engaging private sector, and we will give maybe commitments of between 20 and 25 years on investment so that the return can be able to be achieved. That is by development of huge dams as the first intervention, because we've realized, we've always known, but we had hoped that the public finance can be sufficient. But of course, with all these issues coming after the COVID, then from COVID, economic, maybe downstream, and then where we are, then the drought comes, complicates the matter. And the private sector has available funding. Mm-hmm. They can look at this as investment. And because the goodwill is there, the regulatory systems are there, we have people in urban centers, in cities, in towns who cannot access sanitation. We are at 22% in urban centers and at maybe 32% at urban centers and 22% in terms of access to sanitation in the rural sector. So it means there is available opportunity to invest, and we are strongly of the view after our analysis that water is bankable, and it depends on how we design, how we put in together maybe friendly financing models that will respond to the private sector investment requirements and the public investment requirements. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a gap of about, we have an investment plan of about 900 billion Kenya shillings. If you translate that into dollars, it will give you about 700 million US dollars that we need to invest between now and another 10 years. And we sort out this issue once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you for a nice summary here, and also kind of inviting the private sector to come in, yes, both with innovation and with money. I think we're running out of time here, and I'd like to really thank the panelists here for your time here. Big hand to them. I think we have some closing remarks from our Global Director, Saroj Jha. Can I invite him? Yeah. Let's take my seat here.
So it's been a fascinating morning. Can you hear me okay? Oh, no. Okay.
Can you get on the stage?
It's been a fascinating morning. How is it now? I'm sitting next to my favorite producer. No, Alice and I had a very good meeting, so Kenya is doing good work. I'm very happy. No, it's been a fascinating morning today in the space of partnership, government, private sector, all forms of private sector, investors, water providers, water companies, water operators, institutions, civil society organizations, communities. How can we really work together to bring more innovation, more technology, more financing on something, as Peter, you said, is basic. We should be able to do it. Why are we not able to make progress on SDG 6.1, 6.2, which, as I said in the Global Commission's launch session, it is about making sure that a poor lady in remote parts of Africa or Asia can safely go to a toilet and doesn't have to think twice where she will go. I think it's about these very basic things that which need to be done. And I'm very happy to see the conversation that has happened here, that there is a role for all the actors to work together in a partnership at different levels of solving the problem locally, but also nationally, but also globally. I think many ministers in the previous session talked about whole of the government, whole of the UN, whole of the international system coming together. The second is a resounding endorsement of the 2030 Water Resources Group as perhaps the most effective partnership platform, not only globally, but also in areas where there's a need for this partnership to address some of the real water security challenges. This essentially as the most one of the most effective platforms for bringing public-private together. And clearly, the scale at which the 2030 WRG is operating could be expanded depending on the resources, depending on the local initiative, leadership. But certainly, as we move forward, the 2030 WRG has a very important role to play in terms of what happens next after this conference. The third point I wanted to make is that do we really have money out there, or do we really need to bring more money into the water sector? I think money is there. There's no liquidity crisis. I think what is difficult is that we really do not have good projects. We do not have good bankable projects, but we do not have the appropriate policies, institutions, and the regulations we need to be able to help private sector come in, which can access that money and can take that risk to be able to provide the service and to be able to make money. Because they create jobs at the end of the day. And that is in a space where I think governments, Kenya on the panel now, and we also heard South Africa and the Indian minister before, and we've heard so many ministers talk about this in the UN conference. The governments are moving in towards what I would call water sector is open for business. And that political commitment we are seeing from the governments, clearly the governments will need to now walk the talk and making sure that they have the right policies. They really, and you talked about the PPP. The other day we talked about reconciling Water Act with the PPP Act in Kenya, which would allow basically more private sector to come in various sectors of the economy. But clearly, the governments would need to implement what they have talked about in the UN conference, which is creating enabling environment for private sector to come forward and work in partnership to really implement this agenda. And that is, we see that consensus, but clearly the government will have to take this forward. The last thing is the role of the international organizations, including the World Bank, the IFC, but other sources of also national development banks, microfinance, more broadly the DFIs. I think if the DFIs, including I would say the multilateral development banks, use the instruments they have been using in the past in other sectors, including, let's say, electricity, that we're all very familiar with for financing private projects, that perhaps will not take us very far. So there is a need for the DFIs to also think a lot more creatively as to what kind of instruments of financing will really help to mobilize or unlock more capital in this sector. And this is a work in progress because in the Governing Council meeting of the 2030 Water Resources Group, one of the topics that we spent a lot of time today was about the financing, the innovative financing part. And you heard my Vice President talk about how we want to take this discussion forward and possibly create an ecosystem of what I would call plug and play. Once you define the problem, you know what kind of projects you're looking for, and then you can choose from a menu of financing options what would really work, depending on the scale at which you're operating. Small projects, community level projects, big projects. And we've done things like this in the past in other sectors of our work. So again, this is an area where a lot of work to be done. I want to thank everyone for being part of this fascinating discussion that we had since morning. I especially want to thank all our panelists. This panel and the one before has been a very good discussion. And I also want to thank World Economic Forum for hosting all of us since today morning. And I think it's a very nice ambience sitting in the World Economic Forum. It gave me a feeling of mini Davos almost in a talk about water. So thank you very much, Gimbe, and everybody from World Economic Forum here who are here, volunteers, officers who really helped and make this possible. Thank you very much.